Hey everyone, how's it going? My name's Muko and welcome back to my channel. So when I was getting my very first software engineering job, I had no idea how the recruiting process worked. Like, I was just trying to get that first job and the whole process seemed like a black box that I couldn't see through whatsoever. Once I entered the industry, however, I started helping out with the recruiting stuff, like going to events and sitting on interview panels and stuff like that. And it started just to make a lot more sense to me, like how all of it worked. And honestly, after I was able to see how things worked from the inside, I feel like ultimately for every job after that, I was just a much better candidate because I knew how things worked. And so I kind of figured it would be really useful for a lot of y'all who are trying to get that first job as software engineers to learn about how the recruiting process works. So I invited my friend Sarah, who's the lead negotiator at Levels.fyi and who also worked as a recruiter for multiple FANG companies, to my show Muko's Corner to talk about the recruiting process. I've had her on the show before and we've talked about salary negotiation, but just her experiences are so valuable because she really knows the ins and outs of recruiting and the do's and don'ts of getting that first job. So in today's video, I'm going to share with you highlights from that show, all about how the recruiting process works. Everything from when the recruiting season starts to where companies decide to recruit candidates from and more. So let's get started. What does a typical process look like for a new grad to get a job out of college into the tech industry?
In terms of from a candidate perspective, it's going to be pretty similar to an industry recruiting where you're going to go through the process of talking to your recruiter and then the first technical phone interview and then the final round. So usually for some company, they like to kind of shrink it and only have you talk to maybe 2 to 3 software engineer. And then some company would want you to talk to 3 to 5 engineer. Now, these interviewers are usually those that just volunteer to be an interviewer. So these interviewers that you talk to from a new grad perspective or intern, they may not be the people that you will be working with. In terms of the process, it tends to be a little bit more volume driven. So for industry recruiting, usually what we look for is something very specific, like we need a backend engineer who have experience with cloud computing, for example. Versus for intern and new grad, we usually just call them as fungible engineer. Let's just hire them through and then we'll figure out a team for them after. So a lot of it is usually by cohort too. So a lot of it is just almost the best way to describe it is batch hiring.
When does recruiting start for new grads? I guess so if someone was to graduate in 2022, let's say, what's the earliest that companies are going to start looking to hire new grads?
Yeah, good question. So for new grad and intern, the process start a lot sooner than when they actually open up the job. So usually for Amazon, we do operational planning. So we do operational planning 1 and then operational planning 2. So there's going to be 2 times when we will review headcount and things like that and budget. What does that look like? And only certain teams choose to participate in, okay, we want to have intern, and some teams can say, hey, we don't have that capacity right now and therefore we're not going to participate. So for a new grad, usually the hiring process already start in January of the year and the headcount, they usually get headcount from August of the previous years already. The process, the headcount planning and all of that happens a lot sooner than you expected. So usually around this time, and it sucks for a lot of folks who graduate in December when they start applying and they don't see anything and they just start to wonder is there something wrong with my resume? What do I need to do to kind of optimize my chance? And sometimes too, the headcount doesn't open until March or June, and then the interview process will happen about 1 to 2 months, and then you get your offer, and then you start in around August.
So is it right then to kind of generalize that each company kind of has a number, they have there's this many seats open for new grads, and then so you said new grad recruiting tends to be very volume based, where it's literally just interview as many people as you can from different schools and try to fill those seats. Is that kind of a good summary of how that works?
Yeah, so there's internship and there's also co-op. So for some company Microsoft, for example, or even Facebook, they have specific recruiter to support certain school. And then some company, like for example, Apple can choose to have a much longer internship, or that's what we call co-op, where it can be anywhere from 6 months to a year. And then there's only some company that say, we don't want to do that. We only want to do like, 12 weeks sort of like program for intern. Usually I would say like stay on top of that company internship program, because when we post a job, we just get so many applicants. So usually the job only stay up for about a month, and then after that we're going to take them down to process all of the applicants that we have from those pipelines.
How do companies decide where to recruit from as far as like choosing which universities?
Yeah, so usually they would choose like top tech companies. So for example, at Microsoft, they would have a team of recruiter who only go after like Ivy League school. And then we have, or Microsoft sometimes would have like a team that go to like top tech school like UC Berkeley or Waterloo. It really depends, and usually company pays so much money to these school, and that's why they want that ROI back in their pocket.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think I get a lot of questions about like, is it worth it to go to a 4-year university for computer science, or should I go to a boot camp? And ultimately, one of the things that I think is important to think about is like, what kind of connections does that school have? Because if you go to a school that has those connections, like if you go to UW, it's going to have a connection to Microsoft because it's right there. If you go to Stanford, you're going to have connections to basically every tech company there is. And so like, it's not just about, I think, the education or the experience of going to school, but it's the network that you gain as a part of being able to go to that school. How does it work on the recruiting side that like we just normal people who are trying to get a job into tech that we don't know about? Like, what's something that you think is like a piece of information that recruiters might all know, but yeah, it's not common knowledge out there?
There's just a lot of different channels for like sourcing candidates. So sometimes we don't just look through like the people that apply, and sometimes it will take us to kind of go out there and operate almost like a headhunter, like to see like who's doing what, and which intern or new grad would be good for a certain position. Like this is more common for machine learning and AI, just because usually there's something specific that we're looking for. The part that's I think that can be a little bit tricky to navigate here is industry recruiting is completely different than new grad recruiting, and there's just a lot more red tape being put around new grad and internship. So sometimes like the difficult part is that I just get so many messages from students, asking for if they can take a look at my resume and things like that, and I can't do anything about it. I don't support the campus, and I don't have any visibility into that. Even for at Amazon, we have 2 completely applicant tracking systems, where one is for only intern, and unless if I support intern, that's the only way that I would get access into it. So I can't just randomly submit someone else's resume for that pod. And that's something that kind of like sucks at the same time. Like as much as I want to help, there isn't anything that I can do. So for those that, maybe want to reach out to a recruiter, be strategic about who you're reaching out to. So instead of just going on LinkedIn and just look for like technical recruiter and send your resume that way, don't do that. Do a little bit more of a tailored search for campus recruiter, search for co-op recruiter, search for like new grad recruiter, because you probably will hear back from those recruiter more than like a leadership or like an industry recruiter.
I think there's a lot of pressure to have like a computer science degree to get that software engineering job. Most universities, computer science is an impacted major, which means that it's really, really hard to get into the programs and really, really hard to stay in the programs. So there's just a lot of pressure to like stay a computer science student. And I think there is a lot of just like this notion that if you don't graduate with a degree, then you won't be able to get that software engineering role. But what do you think about that from a campus recruiting perspective? Is it really important for there to be a line that says BS computer science?
Yeah, so I'm gonna get the PhD out of the way first, because PhD is something very specific, and usually they will require, that you have a computer science or whatever it is that the company really needs. So PhD read your job description, it will say it's a requirement, then therefore you will need a computer science in order to get that PhD internship or scholar program or full-time position. But for bachelor and master degree, if you read the job description carefully for the education section, they don't say you're required to have a computer science. Usually a lot of companies will say computer science or STEM or related field. And when they say that, a computer science degree is not required. And actually, in fact, like from my time working at Amazon and a few other companies, the best engineer that we have actually didn't have a computer science degree. The best engineer that we have came from degree like math, especially math, physics, and some even came from more like education background or even like music, and those make really good software engineer. So you don't need a computer science unless if you're wanting to do something very specific like machine learning and AI, then the company can require that. But for bachelor and master, the answer is no.
Yeah, the math, physics, education, and music majors, it's just that like boggles my mind, because that's not like when I was going to school, I was like, that's not what I want to major. I want to major in computer. Only way to get a job. But that's really interesting. From a campus recruiting's perspective, like who's the one to make the decision of hire versus no hire if it's a little bit like more abstracted away from the teams?
Yeah, so this is kind of like where it gets really tricky, because the manager that you talk to, that person may not be your manager when you start that position. So usually, I'm speaking from like Amazon, and I specifically support Amazon Web Services. We would just kind of put the words out there in terms of like, hey, in recruiting, we're trying to put together a team of, interviewers, like who would want to participate. So only certain manager would say, okay, like I'm open to do this, and then only certain engineer that want to be a part of it. The nice thing about Amazon is that if you're trying to become a bar raiser, it does help kind of get your interview counts in, because at Amazon, to be a bar raiser, you need like 100 interviews to become one. So like sometimes like for the people that want to get promoted, they would like want to volunteer to do interview. In terms of like making a yes or no hire like decision, each person on the interview panel would have like a rubric. So let's say if there's 3 interviewers on your panel, one person would cover data structure and algorithm, one person would cover object-oriented design, and then maybe the manager would be the one that do like cultural fit. And there would be like the checklist that they go through. Did the candidate do this? If they do, let's say this candidate checked 7 boxes out of 10, that's a maybe. And if the candidate only checked 1 out of 10, okay, that's a hard no. Or if the candidate checked 8 out of 10 boxes, okay, that's a yes. And then usually we would have a debrief too, where all of the interviewers sit in a room, kind of talk about that candidate performance and whether or not they would be a good fit for the program or the company.
That's so fascinating. That's like totally separate from how I thought campus recruiting would happen. It's literally like, it's very rubric focused, and it seems it's just like you're just trying to find like a well-rounded engineer who has like computer science fundamentals. Sarah, can new grads negotiate salaries when they get their offer?
For a new grad, usually it's going to be really hard because everything is, again, we're operating from volume here, usually by cohorts, just because of, pay quality. We want to pay everyone the same. For co-op, usually there's a little bit more of like flexibility in terms of negotiating, but not much. But as a new grad, you do have the power to negotiate. In fact, for some company like Microsoft, they want to reward you for, going back to them. So if you had a previous internship with them, they will give you a higher compensation package when you come back to the company.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you all so much for watching until the very end. I hope it helped you to better understand how the recruiting process works. Sarah, of course, as always, shared so many other amazing insights, so you can watch the live recording of the show on Muko's Corner by becoming a member today by clicking the join button below. And you'll also be able to listen to the audio recording of the show through the Muko's Corner podcast. And of course, the other way you can always support me and my work is to subscribe to this channel and share this video with your friends. I'll see you next time, and take care, everybody. Bye!